We are one day away from Red Sox opening day. It is so close. I'm so excited. And this lovely Wednesday episode of Locked On Red Sox, I'm going to be joined by a very special guest. Cannot wait to introduce her. I am your host, NESN's Lauren Campbell. Jake Ignazuski is feeling under the weather today, so he will not be able to join. Doesn't sound like it's going to be anything long term. He won't go on the injured list. He will be back for Thursday. So I want to bring in my special guest, and I will do that right after the break.
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Without further ado, here is our guest for today, the host of the Boston Balling podcast, Gabby Hurlbut. Gabby, tables have turned. I was a guest on your podcast about a year ago, and now you are so honored to have you as a guest today. And I'm sure after UConn's heartbreaking loss that you were just more than ready for baseball to start.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Definitely enjoyed my conversation with you when you came on my show. So always happy to do it. I'm so happy you guys asked me to come on. But yes, it was definitely very, very upsetting what went down on Sunday night for me, being as big of a UConn fan as I am. So it's perfect timing for baseball season to be starting for sure.
It absolutely is. And there's a lot to talk about. We're going to discuss, some overall thoughts on spring training, do some predictions about the team as a whole, and just what we're expecting of the season. So spring training wrapped up Tuesday. The Red Sox did win. It looked kind of dicey in the beginning. Michael Wacha didn't really look too good, which is not what you want to see this close to the season, especially with so many questions in the starting rotation and pitching as a whole. But it was almost kind of familiar from 2021 because the Red Sox would be down often in the season, and they never felt like they were out of games. They were always coming back. So that Tuesday's game was kind of reminiscent of that. But overall, what was your initial impressions with spring training? I know these games don't count, but it's a good time to see the players and get everyone kind of see where they're at in a shortened spring training, especially.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely don't like to way too much into spring training. I don't really like to, overthink what's going on in spring training and think that's going to correlate into the season, because a lot of times it really doesn't. But I do think overall they had a good spring. I was really, really pleased with especially how they started spring training and how they came in really strong, which has to make you feel really good, because the last couple seasons they did start off slow in the spring. And that kind of made me a little bit concerned. And so, I think they've looked really good overall. Like you said, this team is kind of almost like starting off where they picking up where they left off last year, kind of, in a sense, because they still have that mentality of, we're never out of games. We're going to keep fighting until the game is over. And I like how they still carried that mentality into this season. I think obviously, there's been a couple changes, roster changes this year. So I'm excited to kind of see how everybody meshes together this year. Overall, though, I think it was good to end spring training with a win, just to have that momentum going into this first series against the Yankees. So I think overall, I liked what I saw in spring training as a whole.
Yeah, there definitely was a lot to be excited about. There was still, there's always kinks to work out in spring training. That's just the way it goes. That's why we have spring training. And I mentioned, the pitching is kind of a big question mark. And it's especially a bigger question mark now that Chris Sale will be out until at least June. They didn't really do a whole lot to replace Erod. And I've been saying this for a while that no, he wasn't a Cy Young pitcher. He wasn't your ace, but he ate up a ton of innings, and you're losing that going into the season now without Chris Sale. So two-part question here. Just kind of general reaction to the Chris Sale injury, because now this is the third straight season where Eovaldi will be the opening day starter. Obviously very capable, but losing Chris Sale isn't ideal. And then what just overall are you expecting from this rotation? Who gets those 4 and 5 spots?
Yeah, it's definitely tough to hear something like that about Chris Sale, because it's ever really since the 2018 season. I mean, he hasn't really been fully healthy, and it's been tough to kind of watch that go down, especially after that big contract extension. And so I think from that aspect, it's like now it's starting to look like that probably wasn't the best idea to extend him, but at the time it made sense for the team. And it's just really unfortunate to see this happen again after, he comes back last season and obviously didn't have a Chris Sale-like season that we're all used to seeing, which was to be expected because coming back from Tommy John, you kind of have to expect that something like that is going to happen. He's trying to get back into it. He's not going to be the Chris Sale that he was before that. But he was showing glimpses of it. He had some great starts. He had some not so good starts. And so it gave me optimism for this season going into this year that, if we get a healthy Chris Sale this year, that's going to be huge as the number 2 spot, give or take, because obviously you knew with the season of Eovaldi he had last year that he likely would be the number 1 guy, which definitely makes sense. I mean, he earned it last year, and I'm excited to see what he has this year, but it's tough because that's a big loss, especially because Paxton's not going to be healthy either, and we're not going to be able to have him until at least June or July either. And so that's why, to me, with this rotation, it's a little shaky. I mean, I'm not overly confident in Michael Wacha right now. I think, obviously, he's the type of pitcher where it could be hit or miss. I think, honestly, I'm interested in seeing what he does have. I think he can be a solid, back of the rotation guy. I think Rich Hill is kind of in the similar situation where he would probably be more of like a 4 or 5 type of starter if he's in the rotation. I'm also really, really intrigued by Garrett Whitlock. I think that starting potential really, really is there for him. And I think I think he needs some more reps, but I think that that's somebody who definitely could step into that type of role the more that he's given opportunities in terms of longevity and pitching more innings. And then Nick Pavetta obviously should be in the rotation as long as he's healthy. I expect him to have a really good season this year. I think what he showed us last year was that he did have potential to be a solid, he could potentially be like that 2 or 3 guy consistently. I think obviously like last year there were, you had Erod, you had Eovaldi, and then Sale came back, and Pavetta definitely had his really, really good starts too. And I think he was showing glimpses of somebody that could be a consistently good starter in the front of the rotation. So I think that's going to be somebody who can really prove himself this year too. So I think there's a lot of options, but I think on the flip side of that, there's a lot of options in terms of the bullpen as well. Like some of these people now have the capability to pitch out of the bullpen. Like Michael Wacha, for example, might not be somebody who could pan out in the rotation, but I could maybe even see contributing in the bullpen. So I think they're going to take some time at the beginning of the season to really shape out that rotation. But I like that they have options now because we didn't really get a whole lot of that last year. And I like how they're experimenting with guys now who have that potential to be a starter.
Yeah, and it's one thing about Garrett Whitlock too is, he was developed as a starter. He had Tommy John and just absolutely dazzled out of the bullpen. And I'd be fine keeping him in the bullpen. I was at one point over the summer or over the winter, I was like, he should just be the closer because Matt Barnes couldn't get himself together. But, I do think it's worth seeing what he has there as a starter slowly over time. Because he was just so good out of the bullpen. You don't have a lot of options out of the bullpen, like you mentioned. Another big question mark and somebody I'm truly interested in to see how he handles this season is Tanner Houck. I think he could be make or break for this team. I think that last season, he was up and down between Boston and Worcester. I think it was 7 times, stayed positive the whole time, but that has to be mentally taxing, just kind of not knowing where you're going to be, where you're going to pitch, what kind of role you're going to play for the Boston Red Sox. Like, am I going to pitch in Boston tonight or do I have to get back on a bus and get back to Worcester? But it sounds like he's going to be a starter. Alex Cora has said that he most likely will be in this rotation. And I think that this is a really good season for Houck to really showcase his stuff. He needs, he needs to be confident. He needs to get those reps and he needs to get through the 3rd time in the lineup. But I'm really have my eyes set on Houck, and I named him as my X factor for a NESN article that I was just like, he's going to be the person that could have a breakout season, but could also have a terrible season. I really don't think there's an in-between for Houck, but I think this is the season one way or another. He figures it out.
Yeah, he's an interesting one for sure. Because, like you said, you never really know what you're going to get from him, which I think is a huge problem still. Because, if you could get the really good version of Tanner Houck, which is almost unhittable, and it's pretty
Right.
scary, especially those first 2 times through the order. People don't want to face Tanner Houck when he's on point and he has his best stuff. But then he has the nights where he just doesn't have it, and I think that happened too often when he was pitching in Boston last year. And I think honestly it's a time thing with him is kind of what I've always felt like with him. I think he obviously needs to work on developing that solid third pitch so he can get through like the longevity and more innings and that third time through the order, because that was what really pained me when he pitched. Was this kid has the potential, like he has the potential to have really, really good stuff. And if he does, that could be a really, really lethal weapon, I feel like, in the
Yeah.
rotation. But the problem is, I don't think he's quite there yet still. And so I think this is really the season, like you said, for him to be able to prove himself and prove that he deserves that consistent spot in the rotation, because we're probably going to need him considering all of the question marks with the pitching as it is right now. And that's what I worried about when they signed Paxton. I was like, that's a little risky as it is, because we don't know if Chris Sale's going to be fully healthy. And then as a result, here we go. And then obviously, the Erod situation. And so I think this is the perfect time for Tanner Houck to be able to really put the reps in and really be able to show that he deserves that consistent spot. So I agree with you. I think he could be a huge X factor, and he has a chance to make or break the strength of the rotation, which is something that last year was definitely, not their strongest suit. And I think obviously with Nathan Eovaldi, I love the guy. I think he's great. Obviously last season he had an outstanding season. Whether he repeats the season he had last year, I don't know. I mean, that's going to be tough, I think, because the numbers he put up last year were pretty just unreal, I think. And so that has to be incorporated into all this too. It's like, yeah, I think Eovaldi still will go out there and be a good number one starter. I think he's going to go out there and give you what you need pretty consistently on most nights, like he did last year. But the season he put together last year, I don't know that can be replicated. And so there's definitely a lot of question marks right now still. And even after watching spring training, I still don't feel super confident in the rotation. I think that that's going to be one of the things that could hold this team back this year, is whether they're able to come together. And these guys that are going to be the back end starters are really going to have to pull their weight as well. And I think it's going to take some time. There might be a little frustration at the beginning of the season while they're trying to figure out exactly what that rotation is going to look like.
Yeah, and a lot of what gets overlooked about Eovaldi's season in 2021 is that he remained fully healthy, which is just incredible for his injury history, 2 Tommy Johns, the loose body removal from his elbow, and just really essentially throwing his arm off in 2018 in the World Series. But he's definitely somebody who's the Red Sox are going to rely on. And I love what you said, that he'll do enough and he'll give the Red Sox what they need. But then you get to the bullpen. And we've seen so many times, not just last season, but in seasons past, that the bullpen has been an issue. And not so much in the postseason in the ALCS, the offense kind of went cold there. And I'm hoping with the addition of Trevor Story and then just how deep the lineup already is, Xander Bogaerts, Rafael Devers, JD Martinez, Kike Hernandez, you look at that 1 through 6, that's pretty deep. And then you go 7, 8, 9, you just kind of plug and play. It's going to be good. But Trevor Story obviously is a huge addition to this team. He's going to bolster that offense, but we know that pitching wins you games, and they could be up 12-0, but they could end up losing 13-12. And Trevor Story can do everything right, but this offense, I think that the lineup is enough to carry this team, but is the pitching enough to help it close out the games? And that's, I think, one of the biggest questions going into the season, because I don't think there's a lot of questions surrounding this offense.
No, I agree with you. The offense we know is, one of the best offenses in baseball. They were last year, and I do think this year it's going to be very similar. Yeah, they lost Schwarber. Yeah, they lost Renfroe, which I was disappointed in the Renfroe, because, that was, he was such a big addition offensively. However, I think the season he had last year was just kind of a unique year. I don't think he's going to repeat that type of season this year. So I think Bloom got rid of him at probably the best time to get rid of him and pull off that kind of trade, because I think that was a time when he was was most desirable to other teams because of the season he had. But, bringing in Trevor Story, you do kind of help fill some of that hole on the offense once Schwarber and Renfroe were gone. And so I do think that definitely helps. And I think, obviously with everybody else in the offense, like you said, I think the offense is going to be just as strong as it was last year. And I'm definitely not concerned about that. I mean, there's some powerful hitters in this lineup. We all knew that. And I think Story is going to fit right in with that. But, people like Jackie Bradley Jr., who probably is going to be an everyday player, like hitting towards the back of the lineup, like, you can't expect as much from him offensively. But what I will say, like, this kind of goes with Trevor Story and Jackie, is like how I think the defense is going to be improved this year too, because the defense, that infield defense was a concern last year. And I think that he did a really good job of addressing that this offseason too, because now they have what could arguably possibly be like the best infield in baseball as well too. And I don't think that's being talked about enough either, because that was definitely a concern last year. There were so many games I remember watching when like they would blow games and like cost runs because of just dumb like errors defensively in the infield. And I think a lot of that's going to be cut out more this year. And I think Bobby Delbeck too. I mean, like obviously like he's had more exposure now and more time. And if we get the second half of the season, Delbeck, that's going to be huge for this team as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll keep talking about this defense, and we will continue to talk about the offense and offer some predictions for the 2022 season. But first, it's that time of the year again. It's April, it's baseball season. The weather's getting warmer. I've usually given up on my New Year's resolutions at this point, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right. Getting married in August, I need to stick to it, and Built Bar makes that possible. The Built Bar Puffs are one of the best tasting protein bars I've ever had. They're a protein-infused marshmallow, so they're fluffy. They're obviously marshmallowy, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. They're low calorie, they're high protein, and you can replace your candy bars with these because they taste just as good, if not better. Go to Built.com, scroll down to the macros chart. You'll be blown away. Most have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. There's also a flavor for everyone: mint brownie, coconut almond, my personal favorite, cookies and cream, and they're coming out with new flavors all the time. Head on over to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. That's LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. And don't forget to check out MLB Prospects, because host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So you mentioned this defense, Gabby, and we are here with Gabby Hurlbut of Boston Balling Podcast. And the defense, we saw that it did struggle last year, but you mentioned that it could be one of like the most lethal infields in all of baseball. And you're absolutely right. I think that with the addition of Story, you're not going to have too many errors there at second base, even though it's a position he's never played. Delbeck looked completely revived in the second half of the season. Bogaerts, he's fine at shortstop. There's plenty of analytics and advanced stats out there that will say different, that he's not Trevor Story's a better defensive shortstop, but that's another conversation for another day. Then you have Rafael Devers, who has struggled at times. He struggles with the most routine foul ball or fly balls, routine ground balls, but he can make a highlight reel play every other game. But this defense, that did struggle last year. But I think that when I'm looking at things to be worried about, it's really not that, especially after Tuesday's game. Alex Cora said that he loved what he saw from the defense.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm looking forward to also, because that was something that very clearly going into the offseason needed to be addressed. And Chaim Bloom knew that, and I think they needed to find somebody else for the infield to help enhance that defense. And I think, even in the outfield, I mean, like there were some errors there. Like obviously I love Renfroe, but he did make some errors defensely in the outfield.
A lot of errors.
Yeah, and that was the thing with him. That was kind of his downfall. Like obviously contributed a lot on offense, and like it was just kind of great for Fenway, great for the team, and worked with them last year. But and his arm obviously was great, but the errors were his thing. And by bringing Jackie Bradley back in, who's one of the best defensive outfielders in baseball, is going to cut out a lot of those mistakes as well in the outfield from a defensive perspective too. And so you have to kind of feel good about that move in that sense. It is weird, kind of Jackie Bradley not playing center field.
Yeah.
That's definitely strange. But I think overall the defense is probably going to end up being one of their strengths this year, if I had to guess. Which is good because that shows that they addressed it. And again, I'm still looking at that bullpen. That's still going to be a question mark. Obviously, the closing spot is a question mark because who knows what version of Matt Barnes is going to show up this year. And there's a lot of question marks still with that. So if I'm looking at everything as a whole, once again, I'm still looking at the bullpen and even the rotation as kind of what to be concerned about this year.
Yeah, 100%. And we can sit here, we can analyze the bullpen, the defense, the offense, and we never know how predictions are going to go. The Red Sox got swept by the Orioles last season to open the 2021 season.
That was embarrassing.
That was terrible. And they ended up going to the ALCS, 2 games from the World Series. So I'm hoping that they don't get swept, but I'm hoping it's a better showing in 2022 against the Yankees in their opening series. But like I said, we can never predict the future, but we're going to try here on Locked On Red Sox. And we asked on the Twitter account, who will lead the Red Sox in home runs this season? We got a lot of answers, and most of them are the same 2 people. A couple people said me, which I'm very honored. I don't think I could even hit the ball back to the pitcher's mound, but I'm very honored that I'm in the running to lead the Red Sox in home runs. But Gabby, if you're looking at this lineup, that's a lot of home runs to be hit. Who leads the team in home runs this year?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good question. I mean, like, if you would ask me this at the beginning of last year, I probably would have said JD, but I'm not so sure that I'm as confident in him this year from that standpoint. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of season he has. I mean, I'm kind of leaning towards Devers on this one, to be honest with you. I think there's plenty of people in this lineup that can go and hit a home run at any given time. I mean, Trevor Story, Bogarts, I mean, even Delbeck, if he's like hitting well, Verdugo. I mean, you can literally list a lot of people that could go out there and hit home runs, but I kind of like the idea of Rafi on that.
Yeah, that was one of the most popular answers. We had Lorraine say Devers, Boston Doug say Devers. Jenny had Devers in her top 3. Patriots Way 7 had Devers. A lot of Devers. Like, I'm still scrolling, and it's no. Keith says no brainer. It's Devers, Rafi. Goes on and on and on. The Locked On Red Sox Twitter account was like, we'll start. So it's JD Martinez, and that is kind of like a safer bet, I would say. I think that JD will hit. I don't think he's going to have more than Devers, but I do think it is a contract year for him. It's also a contract year for Devers, so I think you're going to see a ton of offensive production from both of them. I'm going to be a little bold and say Bobby Delbeck. I think that he really found his swing in the second half of the season, whether that had to do with them bringing Kyle Schwarber in to play a position that he's never played before, to get Delbeck off the field and off the lineup because he was just becoming a liability.
Yeah.
I think it says a lot about how he can respond to competition.
So yeah, he's definitely not a liability anymore.
No, absolutely not. So I think, if he carries a whole season of what he did in the second half, he could hit 35 to 40 home runs. And maybe that's bold of me. I'm a very optimistic person, and I also tried to go a little bolder, try not to say maybe like the more obvious choice, even though I think Delbeck could be an obvious choice. But I'm very much looking forward to see, hopefully, him replicating what he did in 2021. And lastly, where do the Red Sox fall at the end of the season? Like, how many wins do they have? How far do they get into the postseason? Do they even make the postseason? The expanded postseason, they probably should anyway. But where are the Red Sox in Gabby's rankings?
Oh gosh, it's a tough one this year. The AL East again is a powerhouse this year. I don't necessarily know that the Rays are going to be as much in there this year as people think that they are. I mean, as they were last year. I mean, they lost another big bat yesterday, and so from what I'm looking at, I think as of right now, the Blue Jays are the best team in the division.
Oh yeah.
I think that they are a scary team. I think, obviously that lineup, when fully healthy, no pitcher is going to want to face that lineup. Right. And their pitching is, I mean, they could use, another starter or two, I think, but overall their pitching is good. So I do think in terms of just the division alone, I think that the Blue Jays win the division. I think it comes down to the Red Sox and Yankees after that, but I still think the Red Sox are the better team. and the better managed team. And I think that the Red Sox come in second in the AL East. And I think that, I do think they make the playoffs. Obviously, anything can happen in the postseason. It's really hard to say for sure what can happen there. If everybody's healthy, though, I think that the Red Sox have a chance to run it back. I do think that they have the potential with the additions that they made in the offseason to go as far as the ALCS, if not even the World Series. I really genuinely think that they can be a World Series team. And I think the leadership that Jackie Bradley Jr. is going to bring in his familiarity with Boston is severely underrated. I think that's going to be a huge factor this year in the clubhouse. And I think between him and, Xander and JD being kind of like those veterans on the team, like that, have that familiarity and have been around the team, I think are going to be huge for them this year. So I do think if they are healthy, I think that they don't win the division. I think Toronto does, but I think a similar situation as last year where they beat the Blue Jays in the playoffs.
That would be a hell of a series, see Red Sox and Blue Jays for 7 games. Sign me up. That'd be so competitive. I'd love that. And I love that you say, I think that Alex Cora doesn't get enough credit for how well he manages this team. I think that the players love playing for him. He can connect to his players in ways that other managers can't. I think it helps too that he's able to speak Spanish, so he can speak to Rafael Devers in his native language. JD Martinez, Xander Bogaerts speaks like 8 languages. So he's able to connect with them on so many different levels, and players want to play for him. I think he respects his players. I think he hears his players. And even though he makes some questionable in-game decisions, I still think he's a great manager. I think he's great for this team. Digging the beard, I think I like it. It makes him look a little older, but I do think I like it. I thought it would go away by now, but I thought maybe it was just like a COVID beard or like trying it out kind of beard. But it looks like it's here to stay. But if the Red Sox get swept by the Yankees, he has to shave it off.
Exactly. Right?
Those are the rules.
This is a whole superstitious thing now. Like, I really believe in that stuff. Like, if they start the season like 0-3, then I'm going to be like, all right, Cora, time to get rid of that. Like, time to say goodbye to the beard. But then if they go to the World Series, he never gets rid of it ever.
Right. So if they sweep the Yankees, he has to keep it forever. He can't touch it. But if they get swept by the Yankees, he has to shave it off immediately. Gabby, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. For anybody who wants to find you on Twitter or your podcast, where can they find you and support your work?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate you having me on. Really, this was fun. But yeah, Boston Balling is on a lot of different platforms: Apple, Spotify, YouTube. There's a Facebook page that I drop live streams to when I drop episodes. There's a Twitter account at Boston Balling, Instagram account at Boston_Balling_podcast. So it's on all those platforms. I drop episodes once a week. I bring guests on the show. Like Lauren was a guest on my show, which was super fun. So it's a great time. I love doing it and always appreciate, the support for sure.
Yeah, check out Boston Balling. It's a great podcast. Gabby has amazing guests. It's so much fun to listen to. And she always brings such a very positive vibe and good feel. You're always so positive on Twitter. I really admire it because there are times when Twitter is a cesspool to begin with, but when you're able to like keep your positive mindset on a Red Sox team or the Bruins team, the Celtics, literally every Boston team, you're going to find Gabby cheering. So it's always like great follow. Go follow her. Go follow Boston Balling. Rate, review, and subscribe to Locked On Red Sox, LO_Red Sox on Twitter. Find me on Twitter at Lauren, 3 Laws, Lauren with 4 R's. And Jake at Jake Iggy. He will be back on Thursday. We have a very exciting crossover episode with Locked On Yankees. But until then, we will see you tomorrow. Go Red Sox.